In this presentation, we are going to attempt to present some of the archaeological remains of India. What we have is extraordinary, and it's simply a sample of what remains to be worked. More work needs to be done in the region of Southern Asia, probably more than any other region of Eurasia in that regard. Large populations throughout its history in the Bronze Age, even larger than those of Sumer or Old Kingdom of Egypt, for example. And it's based on the two great alluvial fans. We have the Indus River, which is modern-day Pakistan, and the Ganges system to the east. And when you combine the two, it's about 1,600 miles of alluvial deposition. So you have the potential for rich agriculture, but there are various factors involved in this as well. The fact is it's an arid region for the most part, and the Indus is mostly desert, but it does receive the monsoon winds, and it also gets the runoff from the Himalayan mountains. And ecologically a very diverse place, as we will see. The Ganges, more humid, and notice that we are in not in a temperate, but in a subtropical zone. One of the problems we hear about with the Ganges was land clearance, the forest, and the capacity of the forest to just keep closing in. So these various rajas, these various kings had to encourage development through tax dispensations or what have you in this way. And life in the Ganges, it took longer for urban society to develop, but that's clearly was the kind of the heartland, shall we say, of the Magadha and the Mauryan and the Gupta dynasties. Pataliputra became the great capital, and it's near it's on the Ganges. In the Indus Valley, received a lot of Indo-Iranian influences. Taxila, way to the north in the Punjab, became sort of the cultural center, the intellectual center, the university town. Very important, not only for Hindu culture, but also for Buddhist remains as well. Let's go ahead. This map very briefly just shows you the different factors of weather. Where it's pink is where it's really dry, and where it's dark green is where it is basically tropical. So sort of scrub brush in between and dense forest there in the Ganges. Average temperature at New Delhi is about 85 degrees, to give you some sense of the difference that we're dealing with here. I always like to say, for the ancient period, this is the southernmost region of the Eurasian systems that had large urban populations. And its environment varies dramatically. Here we are looking at the Khyber Pass from Afghanistan into India at 3,500 feet. Up in the Punjab, up at the base of the Himalayas, it is an alpine environment. On the right, you're looking at the Hindu Kush Mountains that go along like a spine across east-west across Afghanistan. But as you move downriver, it starts to meander, it starts to spread out, and you get the little bit deposition. We're looking at the Indus here. There's the originally a Mughal fort and then British fort at Attock, about halfway down the Indus. And the chronology, we discussed this in the other lecture as well, but just so you have a working piece right here, we have the Bronze Age Indus Valley Civilization, approximately 3000 to 1900 BC. We have the Vedic era, the period in which the Indo-Aryan peoples came in and settled amid the Dravidian peoples and sort of formed this culture together. The Epic era from approximately 1000 to 600 BC. This is the period of development of state formation. But what we know is that India remained a highly diverse array of tribal populations, some 40 different Mahayanapadas, these kingdoms, mostly ruled by kings, although there were constitutional limits to their power, but also some that were ruled by Buddhist republics led by Buddhist monks and things like this. So it was highly diverse, as diverse as its dialects of language, for example. It was consolidated. The Ganges under the Magadha Empire, we have the great king Dhanananda, who Alexander learned about when he got to the Indus and was prepared to go fight, but the staggering numbers of his armies just inhibited his army and they mutinied. And so he went back to Iran instead. But the very impact of Alexander's invasion had an enormous effect on the Indian populations. We have these sort of wars of expansion to sort of to block the pass. That was the main pass. Those from Afghanistan. That's the main entry port for foreign peoples in. This was consolidated by the Maurya dynasty. So we have Chandragupta, who fought with Seleucus I and came to an understanding, supposedly gave him some 500 elephants as part of their deal, but in agreement he conceded he gained Afghanistan and possibly parts of Iran in the process. And then his grandson Ashoka, the great king who was influenced so much by Buddhist theology. Then it kind of collapsed. There were petty kingdoms. Um, Overall, we have an intrusion of northern peoples. Once again, this is emerges the Kushan Empire from 50 BC to 200 AD. The Kushan is, again, a hybrid population of Turkic peoples, of East Asian Mongolian peoples, and Iranian peoples. At the base seems to have been the Weiji that had migrated in around 200 BC into Afghanistan. But it is a very hybrid. And so they were responsible not only for sort of controlling the trade that went on between India, China, the overland trade, to Iran, and ultimately the Mediterranean and Rome, but they also encouraged the spread of Buddhism, and so it was under the Kushan Empire that Buddhism went to the east and actually became more popular in East Asia than it was in India. This was followed again by collapse and, sort of back to its composite states once again, followed by a very dictatorial regime, the Gupta dynasty, although they had to work out kind of relations with the various sub-kings. But again, there's another kind of classic moment. What we know about the Gupta dynasty, we say, is that this was the period in which there was sort of a retrenchment against Buddhism and the spread of Buddhism in India, and sort of the reorganization, redefining of Hindu culture, the caste system, and things like that became somewhat hardened under the Gupta dynasty. But then that is followed by successive waves of Hunnic peoples, the White Huns, the Mughal Empire, and so on in the Middle Ages. So when we look at Bronze Age India, as we said, we know that the region was highly urban. There were some 6 different called domains of populations, each with sort of a capital city. Although we don't have very good text, there are these seals that have impressions that seem to be based on cuneiform, possibly. But we do know that this was a highly advanced civilization, much larger than Sumer, much larger than the Old Kingdom of Egypt, and that each of these domains sort of enjoyed the same sort of architectural systems, urban systems, and what have you. They're called acephalous because there's no real sort of palace center, no indication of a royalty at the top. But if we see here at Mohenjo-Daro, we have the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro and this building up above it, which some have identified as kind of maybe like a monastery. And so maybe what we have here, knowing what we know about Hindu culture in later times, that maybe this priestly caste sort of controlled the grain collection, the grain distribution, and forced its population to undergo these ablutions of cleansing in order to receive their rations. But nonetheless, these are known as acephalous or headless states. Some views they work with fired brick. Fired brick takes a lot of heat, probably timber. One theory is that maybe the Indus Valley culture depleted its own natural resources and brought on its own demise by about 1900 due to environmental changes in that regard. Here we see the granary system. Here's just some other views of the great grain storage building at Mohenjo-Daro. And the street plan. And it's interesting how the streets are kind of arranged in such a way that the most narrow points, the doorway is the most narrow point. They open on these side streets. There is, as you see to the left, there are, under the streets, there are drains for sewerage and runoff water. Very clear sense, again, interesting, of the kind of clean water in, dirty water out. And sophisticated right-angled urban design in the second millennium BC. Some of the artifacts there are some of the stamps. So there is this script that has not been deciphered. The man to the left may be sort of a priest or maybe a god. And we have this dancing girl down below with her various amulets there, those rings on her arms. To give you again, one of the other domains is the capital city, Harappa. Here is the view of the wall of the citadel. Kind of a staggering, and the work is there for scale. Staggering for its size. Again, fired brick. Staggering as well for the excavation. This is one of the things I think about digging on the Indus or the Ganges, is the amount of alluvium that has been deposited is really staggering. Up in the upper northern region of the Punjab, or the land of the five rivers, we have Taxila. In the again Hellenistic period, it was the capital of Ombi. Ombi invited Alexander the Great to come in. This is his entryway. He came in peacefully and then fought. His neighboring Raja Puru ended up liking Puru more than Ombi and made Puru his satrap for the Indus Valley region. Again, now this mostly dates from the period of the Iranian Empire, and later it's on a grid plan. It's a very large city. It became a major university town. And even the elites of the Ganges would send their sons to be finished off at the finishing schools there at Taxila. Later, it became a center of Buddhist philosophy as well. There are more than 100 of these stupas there at Taxila. It is a World Heritage Site and is under excavation. Here's one of the great stupas at Taxila. And stupas are basically mounds for reliquaries for Buddhist relics. The original one at Sanchi preserved the remains of Siddhartha or Gautama Buddha himself. Others relics of his, but then later Buddhist saints as well. The bodhisattvas also became preserved under these mounds. Here's just a view of one of the monasteries. This is all at Taxila. And the art taken in the Indus shows an interesting influence of what we call Greco-Iranian influences. Notice the column capital in the upper left. It looks a lot like the ones that we saw at Persepolis there. Indian art is very flowing. It likes curves, and so it's hard to really say, well, this is influenced by Greek, so I'm skeptical of that. And to the right, we have the head of one of the Kushan leaders. Again, the Magadha Empire, one of the great empires, approximately 500 to 300 BC. This is the one that, and he was down under, consolidated almost all the territories of the Ganges and moved into the Indus as well. The capital of Pataliputra, which remained the capital even under the Mauryan dynasty. Massive city, and we have Greek sources that provide information about this, but the numbers they give, they all say this city was bigger than Athens. So certainly in the hundreds of thousands, we can assume pretty well. We're looking at the preserved wood ramparts, a gate through the fortress. The gates, the city was on the Ganges, surrounded by a moat as well, and by a number of gates. Vivid descriptions of this, and we even have it preserved. Here is the remains of some sort of hypostyle hall. So we have the Torana, or the temenos fence around the great stupa of Buddha at Sanchi, supposedly started by Ashoka, but mostly dates of the 1st century BC. And on the gate, we have this stone relief that portrays some sort of monumental event going on at Pataliputra. Also shows the houses. Let me see. Yes. So there's some sort of, here we are, we're looking at it. It's a military parade through the town. And we see these houses that are maybe 2 to 3 stories tall. They have these upper story balconies. You can see the horse chariot in the lower portion moving by. This is kind of classic Indian urban architecture where the narrow part, the facade of the house is the narrow part. It's very long with the interior. We'll have a courtyard uh, on the interior and multiple stories as well. And so these reliefs are one of our best testimony because most of this was constructed of wood and it does not survive in the archaeological record. But it really tells us, and that's what I'm going to show you some other examples of the scale. I'm always impressed by the scale of the architecture of ancient Indian culture. Another example, this is Sisupalgarh. This is out actually on the border of Bangladesh. It's out by the mouth of the Ganges River. It's some sort of maybe frontier fortress, but it is some, I think it said 6 kilometers in circumference. Maybe in the interior could have sustained a population of 20,000 people or a giant garrison, shall we say. Baked earth gates. We're looking at this plan of the northwestern gate. And those men on the stairway are in that little stairway at the door, the inner door to the gate itself. So this is kind of staggering once again. And then we have Kosambi, the ramparts of Kosambi, which was the capital of the Kuru kingdom. It goes all the way back to the Vedic era, but the construction dates to the 4th century BC to the 6th century AD. And we're looking at this brick fortification wall with a human figure to give you some sense of scale. And again, the excavation is so much work, especially when it's not really revealing any artifacts, right? So this is costly work in that regard. And notice how the wall is kind of kinked inward, possibly because the alluvial soil is so loose that they wanted to prevent it from tipping, so they've arced it, slanted it to make it more stable, shall we say. And bear in mind the diversity of this. While these things were being built in the 4th through 1st centuries BC, if you went to southern India, people are still living in sort of a pre-Bronze Age culture, Stone Age culture. We have these great megalith tombs. Here is the one at Brahmagiri in Mysore, a porthole Sis tomb this way. And what we know is that the early Indian gurus would go into the South and sort of assimilate the culture and kind of prepare these peoples in the South for eventual assimilation with the mainstream urban cultures to the North, for better or for worse. With the Mauryan dynasty, we have a couple of really epic archaeological remains. The main one are the columns and pillars of Ashoka. Ashoka converted to Buddhism after engaging in very, very violent confrontations with one of the neighboring tribes. And so he put up these pillars, and let's go to that. Here's a map marking many of the pillars in which were inscribed his edicts. So these date to approximately 250 BC. They are the earliest surviving texts of ancient India. Again, apart from external texts such as Greek visitors, Greek ambassadors, Megasthenes, who was sent there by Seleucus I and became his ambassador there at Pataliputra. And then the other problem is, although there is graffiti, there are unbroken pottery in the south. We don't really, when you get to it, the texts don't really pick up until about 1000 AD. So these are really significant for this regard. In which I went right by the column of Ashoka and his edict on it, in which he admits his feeling of remorse for his destruction of this neighboring tribal region and how he has found, worried about Dharma, he has found the true meaning of life through Buddhist religion. And so maybe these pillars were to demarcate his territory, but it was also sort of aphorisms and adages. He's trying to teach his people at the same time of the value of Buddhism. He supported it. He was the first initial sort of funder of Buddhist monasteries and the various reliquaries. And so he also sort of mocked Hinduism to some degree as well. So here is the great stupa at Sanchi, dates to about the 1st century BC in its final state. You have the mound with various um, um, features up on top. The main one at the top is supposed to symbolize the Bodhi tree under which the Buddha received his transcendental experience. It's also the great mound of the earth, and it's connected to the heavens. It has a temenos fence around it, and the devout go in and they do the circumambulation clockwise around it with their right shoulder against the mound. Some of the great monuments here, again, a lot of especially in the Deccan Peninsula, we have a lot of limestone and a lot of limestone sinkholes. And so some of these were quarried out and converted into Buddhist monasteries. So we have the great monastery at Karli, dates to I should say 5th century AD, I'm afraid. The date is wrong there. And what you have here is a hollowed out limestone hillside that is carved in such a way to look like the roof beams of presumably wooden Indian structures, monumental structures, and houses of the time. So they've got this arcing roof beam. You can see how they bent it in place. And it really gives us an impression of maybe how architecture was worked, and then supported by colonnades on each side. All of this is just carved right out of the stone. And the whole monastery was carved into this with housing, monastic centers, as well as these religious centers. And up above on the columns, all these human figures supposedly engaging in every position in the Kama Sutra. And it's all about this need of the monks to be completely divorced from the physical pleasures of life, to be tempted by them and to be able to overcome the temptation as well. Another important point, although this comes later, in the south we have what emerges as Dravidian architecture, and this is the architecture that takes over in the Middle Ages, say from about 500 AD all the way through to 1500 AD, Angkor Wat in Thailand. All of this is based on Dravidian style architecture. In the image in the left, you can see the ground surface way up above. So this was mostly carved directly out of the limestone in this fashion of this sort of pattern terracing. Pattern terracing, each terrace has doorways, and the doorways were supposed to allow the various Hindu gods, thousands of Hindu gods, to be able to come out and alight into the heavens as well. So it's carved right out of the limestone and then hollowed out. And also it has this temple-like structure of terraces that sort of become narrower toward the top. Here we can see some of the details, some of the amazing detail of this. And lastly, I just want to point out that, again, that the Ptolemies figured out, under the Ptolemies, that the merchants of Egypt figured out the monsoon winds that would take their ships to India and go across the Indian Ocean. So this is the first real sailing in the ocean, and oceans have tides, they have storms. This is at a variance from the Mediterranean, for example. And that opened up India as sort of not only a connection to the Mediterranean for its own valuables, such as precious metals, gemstones like pearls, and spices like pepper and cinnamon became all the rage in the Mediterranean by the Roman imperial era, 1st century AD. And in exchange, Romans brought what they could, which was mainly Roman wine and Roman fine wares and silver coinage. So a lot of coinage seems to have been sent to India to maintain this trade. In addition, the overland route from China brought things like silk and precious materials from China as well to the Indus, and then from there it could make its way as well. And so India became the middleman, if you want, for trade between East Asia and the Mediterranean. Now, the sea route is enormous. It's some 7,000 nautical miles, and you have to go from the ancient site of Canton and China all the way around Indonesia and up. That's the problem there. And it's not clear that these territories would have been stable enough to have allowed this. I mean, piracy, and think of that. How do you create the means to be able to sail through regions like this? So it's not clear that the sea route to China was active until after about 500 AD. Most of this silk trade is coming along the land route across Afghanistan. And again, scholars have always debated about the scale of this trade. Prestige goods, I mean, it's baubles. Does it really affect the economies of either place? But this is where we need the work in India to continue working, especially along the southern coast where the Rajas there um, had a real thing for wines coming from the Mediterranean. So here is the great excavation, mainly by India. I'm trying to remember Bagala, and at Arikamedu in Pondicherry in the southeast coast of India, where they found just these amazing Roman artifacts. So here is Artine ware, this terra sigillata fine wares, as well as various transport jars. So transport jars, particularly the Cohen jars. Um, the one on the right is one that was studied by Elizabeth Ladding Will at Arikamedu. The ones down there on the bottom are from my own kiln sites that I found at on the south coast of Turkey, and they are dramatically similar. I mean, I need to see the thing and study the fabric to be certain, but um, interesting that Greek wines were so valuable with the Rajas, and that's another story in and of itself. And we'll stop with that.